What's up, everybody? So I frequently have people hitting me up asking me about scrub pythons. They're interested in them, but they're not really sure where to start in terms of learning about all the different species and locality types. So this video will be me going through all of the different locality types and species of scrub pythons that are available in the reptile hobby, just like this Barneck scrub python here. So stay tuned and I'll be showing you everything that there is to see. All right, so here we have the first type of scrub python I'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, as some of you may know, some of you may not, there are 5 different species of scrub pythons that are currently recognized. Of those 5, one of them we do not have available in the United States and potentially in the European trade either, and that would be the Australian scrub python, Somalia kinghorni. And for the reason that Australia, as many of us know, is very strict with their import-export laws on wildlife, and while many Australian reptiles were able to, one way or another, get out of Australia and establish in markets outside in the rest of the world, Australian scrub pythons were not one of them. To the best of my knowledge right now, there are only 2 Australian scrub pythons in the United States, and there are 2 females that are at reptile gardens in South Dakota. So with that said, this is the first type of scrub python we'll be getting into, and this is the species that encompasses a majority of the different locality types, which is Somalia amethystina. This is a Malukan locality southern scrub python. So much like green tree pythons, the scrub python populations are really separated by that central mountain range in Papua New Guinea, to where the northern types and the southern types are pretty distinctive from one another. The Malukan locality southern scrub pythons are the most similar to the Australian scrub pythons as far as appearance goes. They both come from the same kind of savanna habitat, so this tan and light brown sort of coloration suits them very well for blending in. The Malukan locality scrub python is a bit of a misnomer. That's kind of how we refer to them in the hobby, but these snakes span the entirety of the southern portion of Papua New Guinea, east to west, and they even extend down into the northern tip of Australia a little bit, through Cape York and a little bit south of there. Definitely the most represented scrub python in the US hobby. Imports have been plentiful over the years, and through the last 3 to 5 years or so, there has been a very good amount of captive breeding done with this locality type. So in the way that I see it, it's very safe to say that they are well established in captivity and will be for years to come, which is something that I'm very happy to be able to say and happy to also be a part of. So this is one of my adult males. These guys will get typical amethystina size of about 10 feet on average as adults, with the largest examples getting 12 feet long, sometimes even longer than that, but in general, average size is about 10 feet long on these guys. Very underappreciated. There's a lot of these out there, but a great scrub python and a good starter for a lot of people, considering that their price tag is a little bit lower than some of the other locality types and species. All right, and this is the next type of southern scrub python, and this is kind of what the hobby refers to as the Tanmar southern scrub python. So we'll put up a little map of Papua New Guinea, but there are essentially 3 layers of populations of the southern type mainland scrub pythons. The Malukan type that we just talked about is the one that's at the lowest level, the one that goes down into Australia. And then the orange Highland or oxabel type, which we'll be talking about next, is kind of the one that is just at the basin of the mountain range that extends all the way east to west throughout New Guinea. Well, these guys are kind of the in-between of that, where they still exist in a bit more of a jungle habitat, but they're not quite down to the basin of the mountain range like the, so to speak, Highland types are. With this type, one of the main differences between them and the Marukis, they're a bit darker, they have a bit more depth of their coloration, where some of them can have some of the orange lateral bars that you'll see in the Highland types, and a little bit darker brown coloration, just shades that you won't see in the Malukan individuals. But the main thing that sets these apart from the Highland types and the Malukan types is that this is the population where the patternless animals exist. So there are no patternless Marukis, that's not a thing. There's no patternless Australian scrubs. And if there are, maybe there's been a couple ever, where with these guys it is very, very plentiful in their wild populations. So it is a recessive gene, and potentially an animal like this, and this will be a longer term project to find out, could be the het patternless version where it kind of has this granity look. This is actually an F2 captive bred animal, so very, very lucky to be able to have an animal like this that is multi-generational and obviously as amazing as she is. But that patternless aspect makes these guys pretty interesting. So if you see a patternless southern animal offered for sale anywhere, it is in this middle population that the hobby likes to refer to as the Tanmar type. Yeah, with that said, same size-wise, everything else as the Maruki Southerns. Definitely a lot that can be done with this population of scrub pythons from a line breeding standpoint that just nobody has really pursued yet. So a bright future ahead for the Tanmar Southerns, and one that I will be very excited to watch progress. All right, and this is the third type of mainland southern scrub python, and definitely my favorite. This is the orange Highland scrub python. These will also be called oxabill scrub pythons, Tamika scrub pythons. The truth of the matter is they come from both of those locations, but this phenotype can be found basically at the basin of the central mountain range in Papua New Guinea, all the way from east to west. So without true collection data, you really can't put a locality name specifically on these snakes. That's why I like to use the orange Highland moniker. The Highland is a little bit misleading. These snakes can be found at 1,000, 1,500 feet of elevation, but it's a phrase that I think we can use to effectively separate these from the Tanmar Southerns and the Maruki Southerns. So obviously, as you can see on this snake, they get their orange namesake for a reason. These snakes are often very orange. They can have some purple coloration in them as well. They're very beautiful snakes. I think they definitely rival Malukan scrub pythons. But one thing that is definitely a telltale sign are these orange lateral bars here. They will be present on some of those middle range Tanmar Southerns, but not quite as pronounced as it would be on the orange Highlands. And they are amazing. These have been produced captively a handful of times now. I had a clutch of these a couple of years ago. James Oakdahl had a clutch of these the same year as well. They've been bred in Europe a handful of times. So these animals are out there. They are not nearly as common as the other two forms of southern scrub python, but they are not entirely impossible to find either. So another one that in the years to come, I know we will see even more line breeding progression than we already have. Some of the orange Highland animals that are being produced in Europe are just absolutely mind-blowing. Truly a top-tier scrub python, in my opinion, rivaling that of the Arus and the Malukans. All right, so now we are moving on to the island forms of the southern scrub pythons. This right here is an Aru scrub python. So Aru is a large island south of mainland Papua New Guinea. And these are, I've said it before and I will continue saying it without question, the most underrated locality type of scrub python. To me, the way that I like to describe their appearance is kind of like an orange diamond python. They have very intricate kind of diamond-like pattern throughout their body with that incredible orange coloration, and then later in the body fading to a bit more of like a purplish coloration. To me, their appearance rivals the Malukan scrub pythons, which everyone covets so highly. The main reason why Aru scrub pythons are underrated is because they're very underrepresented. There are very few Aru scrub pythons in captivity in the entire world. They are one of the only types of scrub python that have never been produced in the United States. To my knowledge, they've only been produced in Europe once, maybe twice, ever. So a snake that is not imported often, almost never bred, and really not often seen in collections, although they have been floating around for a very long time. One that I would like to do what I can to bring more awareness to. Even though these are an island type, they do not experience any form of island dwarfism, although some people may try to tell you that they do. Aru scrub pythons get to the same adult size as mainland southern scrub pythons of an average of 10 feet long, with exceptional individuals growing to 12 feet in length. So No island dwarfism here, the exact same physiology as you'd get on the mainland types, but one of the most beautiful scrub pythons, and of the southern scrub complex, if I had to pick a favorite, it'd be hard not to choose the Arus. So this is the final type of southern scrub python. This is the other island variation. This is a Key Island scrub python. So the Key Island is a small island that is west of Aru, which is also, like I said with the Arus, south of West Papua. And these guys are relatively new to the hobby as far as from like a visibility standpoint goes. They've been around historically, but many more have been popping up in collections and collectors in Indonesia over the last couple of years. They're a very beautiful locality type of southern scrub python, often very easily mistaken for either Arus or for Malukan scrub pythons. And they're kind of like a perfect blend of the two as far as their color and pattern goes. The pattern is almost identical to that of an Aru scrub, with kind of the coloration of a Malukan, of that kind of yellow gold on the front half and then purple on the back half. Ways to tell Malukans and Key Islands apart: one, their head shape is pretty significantly different. Key Islands have a much more vertically compressed head, where Malukans are much kind of like a more bulbous head structure. But then from a pattern standpoint, the main way you can tell them apart is that the Key Islands have this kind of silver spotted pattern throughout their body, and that is a trait that you will not find on any Malukan scrub pythons. So easy to get the two mixed up, but there are some key factors you can use in telling them apart. Same size parameters as the other Amethystina. I mean, this guy right here is at least 10 feet long. He's a big boy, and one that I hope we in the U.S. can see more of in the years to come, and hopefully eventually captive breeding. All right, so now we are on to the northern types of scrub pythons, and this right here is a Womina or Jayapura type scrub python. These guys are, their name is a bit of a misnomer, kind of like some of these other ones, where the Womina name was always associated with them. The Jayapura name has historically been associated with Barneck scrub pythons. That being because Jayapura is one of the larger export ports out of Papua New Guinea, and oftentimes bags will just get labeled with that name instead of where they actually came from. If anyone tries to sell you a Jayapura Barneck scrub python, that is an accurate label. Basically, they should be called the northwestern scrub python. This phenotype extends all the way east, all the way through Papua New Guinea to the areas that we cannot access. So these animals that we have in captivity in the US and in Europe are essentially the westernmost extreme of the northeastern scrub python. They're very similar to Barnecks. They do have some characteristic differences, mainly in their color palette. They do have a bit of a neck bar, but not nearly as pronounced as the Barnecks do. But with these guys, they have a bit more of a muted pattern. Their color palette is essentially brown, tan, yellow, and orange. There are patternless Wominas. They are pretty far and few in between. They're beautiful though. But one of the most distinctive factors that you can always use to identify this locality type, the Womina scrub pythons have a very distinctive patternless pale pink tongue. Say that 5 times fast. So when it comes to identifying the patternless animals, they do look a little bit different than patternless southerns, but not extremely different. That tongue though is the main way to tell the difference if you have a patternless Womina or a patternless southern. One thing that sometimes people try to tell you is that these guys are a smaller type than the Barnecks and some of the southerns. That is absolutely not the case. This girl is a bit on the smaller side. This is my breeder female, but her mate is all of 12 feet and bigger than any of my Barnecks. So these guys are definitely not a dwarf type. They do get the same size as the rest of the Amethystina complex, but they are, in my opinion, probably one of the more underappreciated scrubs. There's a lot of work to be done in the future with line breeding on these, so the future for Wominas is definitely bright. All right, so this here is one of the most iconic types of scrub pythons. Of course, this is a Barneck scrub python. So this girl in particular is potentially my favorite snake in my entire collection. She was from my first ever scrub python clutch, which hatched out back in 2020, and she is, in my opinion, the standout from that clutch. But the Barneck scrub pythons, they are a a northern type within the Amethystina complex. Their range is in the Bird's Head Peninsula of West Papua and then the Raja Ampat Archipelago. Their namesake comes from the bars behind their head, if I can get her to turn around and show you. But Barneck just refers to the bars that are on the neck of the snake. But they are typically identified as a black banded scrub python with a base color that ranges from tan to gold. And then by the tail, that pattern kind of dissipates to where it is a little bit more uniform as compared to the upper end of the snake. So these are one of the most sought after, and for good reason, types of scrub python. And they are, as of the last few years, more readily bred here in the United States, with a good handful of breeders having success getting good clutches of Barneck scrub pythons. And that is only a benefit to all of us in the long run to have as many genetic lineages of unrelated captive bred Barneck scrub pythons as possible. All right, so this is the final type of northern scrub python. This is the Booc scrub python. And as the name would suggest, these are from Booc Island, which is east of the Bird's Head Peninsula in Papua New Guinea. And these are probably the strangest scrub python. They're really unlike anything else. This kind of faded two-tone look is quite different than the Barnecks. They are really lacking that bar on the neck. Some of them have a little bit of pattern there, but nothing nearly as distinctive as even the Womina types, and definitely not the Barneck types. This is quite an uncommon locality of scrub python. They've only been bred one time ever, and never in the United States. And one thing that's very interesting about them that only holds true with the Halmahera scrub pythons is that Booc scrub pythons are born with adult coloration. So the rest of the scrub pythons start off on the kind of orange to red spectrum, so to speak, where these guys and the Halmahera scrub pythons have their full brown adult coloration from the time that they're born, which is very interesting to me. So really a very different snake, not quite as visually stunning as, maybe say Barnecks or Arus, but super unique in their own right, and one of my favorite localities of scrub python. All right, so now that we are through the Amethystina complex, now it's time to look at the other species of scrub python that are full species separated from Amethystina. And this right here is a Halmahera scrub python. So this is Somalia traceae, named after the world famous Tracy Barker. This is one of the stranger scrub python types. Their pattern is really entirely different than any other scrub python. And one of the things that makes them stand out is, unlike the rest of Amethystina, Clastolepis, and the Tanmar scrubs, these are born with their full adult coloration. So they do not go through an ontogenic color change. Their colors may become more brilliant over time, but you get that final adult form in a Halmahera scrub right off the bat. The only other scrub python that I know of, at least, or that is in captivity, that also does not go through that color change is the Booc scrub python that we talked about a bit earlier. So these are known to be a little bit smaller than the Amethystina, with typical adult size being around 8 feet long. There are definitely individuals that are over 10 feet long. I've heard of as large as 12 feet for a Halmahera, but typically speaking, these snakes are not quite as large as the Amethystina complex. One of the things that historically was the most fascinating about these snakes is that up until 2018, they were the only known python species to have never been bred in captivity. That was until Blake Bauer at the Oklahoma City Zoo successfully hatched out a clutch. Since then, I believe 5 or 6 other people worldwide have successfully produced Halmahera scrub pythons. Here in the US, Shane Adamson, Chuck Poland, and now this year, Stephen Tillis have all produced Halmahera scrub pythons. So big shout out to those guys for pushing the advancement of this species forward. For those of you who don't know, I do a podcast called Cush's Corner on the Trap Talk Reptile Network every Wednesday. And back over the summer, I did an interview with both Shane Adamson and Blake Bauer simultaneously. So if you guys want to check out that episode, we'll throw a link down to it in the description for a real deep dive into Halmahera scrub pythons. But other than that, their color palette is a bit more limited than some of the other scrub pythons. That's not to say that they aren't beautiful. Typically their colors range from a mixture of brown to tan to kind of an orangish yellow to even a more golden yellow. But the brown and dark tan is kind of the typical Halmahera coloration. This girl in particular is very brilliant. She is much lighter color than a typical Halmahera and almost kind of an orangish head. So she is one that I cherish greatly, one of my favorite snakes in the collection, and truly one of my favorite snake species I've ever had the pleasure to keep and interact with. All right, so this is one of the other species of scrub python, and this one is the one species or type that is truly a dwarf scrub python. So this is a Tanmar scrub python, Somalia nata, obviously from the Tanmar Islands. And these guys are significantly smaller than the rest of the scrub pythons. This here is an adult male. He's probably about 6 or 6.5 feet long. To give a range to these snakes, I would say 6 or 7 feet is about adult size for them, full-grown size. So obviously significantly smaller than the approximate 10-foot length that most of the other scrub pythons get. These guys come in 4 different distinctive color phases, a combination of yellow and axanthic and pattern and patternless. I'll get into all that in a future video where I do a deeper dive into Tanmar scrub pythons. These guys are definitely a more sought after type. Historically, they were one of the more readily available scrub pythons in the US trade, and then by about 2017, whatever happened, quotas went to 0, whatever it may be, they were not seen imported again until about 2022. So the numbers of these in captivity in the US and really all over the world are fairly low. Instances of captive breeding are kind of few and far in between. In the US, a few people from Nick Mutton, Ryan Young, Chris Foley, and a few others, Eric Hernandez, have had good success historically breeding these snakes. I hope to see that number increase in the future. I hope to be able to do it myself as well, because these are truly incredible animals. And the scrub python, for somebody who doesn't quite have the means of keeping a snake that gets 8 foot, 10 foot long, or maybe even larger. All right, last but most certainly not least is what myself and many others probably consider the holy grail of the scrub python world. That is the Malukan scrub python, or Somalia clastolepis. So as the namesake suggests, these guys are from the Maluku archipelago. The 2 primary collection sites where these animals originate from are Ambon and Seram. And they're just special in every way possible. They are brilliantly colored, known for those kind of lacquer gold and purple colors. Unlike the rest of the scrub pythons, they do fade out in color a bit as they get older. As you can see, this guy on the back is kind of browned out. Males will stay a little bit more brilliantly colored than females, where once females get larger, start to cycle for breeding, they start to go dark, like all scrub pythons will once they are developing follicles. But that darkness will kind of stay longer term with the Malukans. Kind of the peak of their appearance is between about 3 and 5 years old. But with that said, I think they're beautiful for their entire lifespan. A common myth with these guys is that they are an island dwarf type of scrub python, and as you can clearly see from this animal that is in my hand, that is most certainly not true. These guys reach the same sizes as Amethystina, and in my opinion are proportionally the heaviest bodied of all scrub pythons. So don't be fooled. If you want to get into Malukan scrub pythons, definitely be ready for a decent sized snake, but still a snake that can be managed reasonably and doesn't quite reach the size that a Burmese python or an anaconda would, so to speak. Typically pretty well mannered, as you can see by this guy, and as you can really see by a lot of these, mostly all of these snakes that I've had out today. But really nothing that I can't really say anything about these guys that hasn't been said already. They are as special as they get. In my opinion, these guys are right up there with Boland's pythons for the most impressive pythons in the entire world. And a species that any Scrub Python aficionado has on the absolute top of their list. All right, everybody, so there you have it. Those are all of the available species and locality types that the reptile hobby has as of today. There are inevitably many more scrub pythons out there that we are either not aware of or don't have in captivity, whether that be in Indonesia or in Australia. But for now, there are a lot of awesome choices that we have. So if you like that video, please hit that subscribe button, like, share, do all those good things. You can find me on Instagram at Scrub Shepherd and at Stephen Cush on Facebook. Thank you for watching the video, and I'll catch you all back here next week.